Hi and welcome back. I'm Thomas Boucher, and in this video we're going to take a look at rekeying 2 chest locks. I recently had a customer contact me about rekeying some locks for them. They sent me 2 of them to start with, and they're both chest locks, but they're different kinds. So we're going to take a look at them, and I'm going to show the process of working on them. So here's one of the locks that they sent me, and this is what's called a Crablock. You may have seen some of my other videos on working on small crab locks, and I'll put a link to those in the video. I believe this to be of Germanic origin, and I've done some research as to what key should go with this lock, and I've designed something based on the proportions of this lock and kind of what it needs to look like. This is the other lock that they sent me. It's a small English chest lock, and this one goes into tea caddy. And it's a pretty simple lock. It looks as though it did have a ward, but it must have broken off because I can't see that when I look inside the keyhole. But I'm going to be able to use a cast key, I believe, to rekey this one. So this one should be a little bit easier than the other one. So I maybe will show a little bit of the process for fixing up this one, but not as much as the other one, because that's going to be a little bit more of an interesting process. So I'm going to get started and we'll take a look. The first thing I'm going to need to do is figure out the diameter of the drill pin in that lock, so I know what size hole to drill in the stem of this key so that it will fit. Now the bit on this is a little too long and a little too tall to fit that lock, so I'll have to cut those down or file them down. But that's really all I think I'm going to have to do for this one. It's pretty simple, straightforward, like I said, so I think this will be a good place to start, be a little bit of an easing into the project, because the other key is going to be a little more complicated. So what I'm doing right now is just measuring the drill pin to get the diameter of it, and it looks to me as though I'm going to need something that's just slightly under 0.1, so maybe like a 0.09 drill bit. So I'm going to go over to the drill index and see what I've got for a size over there that's as close as I can get. I'll drill out the key stem and try putting it onto the drill pin of this lock and see if it fits. So I've got a number 43 drill bit in here. It measures 0.089, so it's pretty much right within where I need to be. I think it's going to be a good starting point. I've got my key in the vise here, and I've got it oriented straight up and down as best I can, and I've got the drill bit located as centered as best I can. There's a pilot hole already drilled in the key, so there's going to be a little bit of a leeway here for the drill bit to kind of follow that path, but you want to try to get it as squared up and centered as good as you can, and hopefully we don't drill out the side of the key stem. So now that I got that drilled, we'll go see if it's going to fit on the drill pin. So I can see that yes, it is going on to the drill pin. It's maybe a touch tight in a spot, so I may end up drilling it just a hair bigger later, but first I want to cut the bit down to get it going into the keyhole the whole way and make sure that further down in there that it's still working good, and if it's still too tight then I'll drill it, but I don't want to drill it now because I don't want it to be too loose and sloppy. So what I'm going to do now is mark the width of the bit, the width of the bit to make sure I can get it down into the keyhole. I may have to trim it some more later once I start trying to swing the key, but I just want to get it to go down into the keyhole at this point and make sure that, like I said, the stem is fitting on to the drill pin and that obviously it can go into the keyhole. So what I'm going to do first is make a mark on the bit that lets me know where I need to cut it to or file it to. I'll probably file this because it's pretty small, so it'll let me know where to trim that to, and then see if it fits into the lock. You can see that, hopefully you can see here, that the bit is too tall for that keyhole. So what I need to do is give myself a mark roughly there to trim it to. I think that'll allow it to go into the keyhole. And I'm going to keep testing, so don't just take a whole bunch of material off and hope that you're there, because you may go too far. So as I'm trimming stuff, I'll keep testing, make sure that it's where it needs to be. So that'll give me a good mark to start referencing to. So I've got these 2 small pieces of 1/4 inch square material, and I'm going to use those to help me hold on to the key in the jaws of the vise. That way I can clamp it down nice and tight and it's not going to crush the stem of my key bit, or the stem of my key. And those pieces of material go right under my mark. This is a bit of a tricky maneuver to get all this in here. But if you're patient, you'll be able to get them in there. I've got those in there, and we can go down a touch. I'm doing my best to try to keep this nice and flat and parallel with the jaws of the vise to try to get a flat surface. I will check it from time to time. Again, I want to check where my mark is at. I'm getting pretty close there, so I'm going to take it out and check it against the lock. So I've got at least another 30 seconds to go before it'll enter. So I think I'm going to stop there and test it again. Just about there. Just another, I don't know, heavy 64th maybe. So that 1/4 inch material I was using turned out to be a little too tall, so I just cut a couple pieces of 3/16 thick. So at this point I want to tread real slowly so I don't go too far. Again, I suspect more will have to come off. Right now I'm just trying to get it to go through the keyhole. So that's real close. All I have to do now is just break the corners. I think it'll go in. So now that I've got the key going into the keyhole, I have to trim the height of it so that way it's not too tall and it can actually swing around inside the lock. So I'm going to try to measure it and see how much I have to take off, or whereabouts. Maybe about 3/30 seconds. I'm going to measure the lock height as well just to get an idea. So it's about 5/30 seconds. So I made a little bit of a mark down from the top of the bit because I want to leave as much of the stem as I can. So what I'm going to do is grab the bit in the edge of the vise here. I'm going to use a safe edge file, try to file the height of that down because there's not a lot there to cut. It's only about 1/16 of an inch, so I'm not going to try to use a saw. So I'm getting pretty close to the line, so I'm going to check. So I got to trim it back towards the stem a little bit more. So it's getting real close to the height. You got to come down maybe 30-second, maybe not quite. So that's looking pretty good so far. Again, you want to just slowly take stuff off to make sure that you don't go too far. I think that'll do it for the height. I have to file the stem round. You see that shiny bit at the top there where I cut the bit down? It's still square there, so the stem's hanging up as I try to turn. So the way that I like to do this is I open the jaws on the vise just enough to kind of rest the stem in there so I have something to bear against. And I'll just kind of file it by eye. Goes in. And it's starting to turn. So when I put the key in and try to turn it, it seems to be stopping at about that position. So I think I need to trim the height of it here because I think that that's hitting the housing. And I haven't radiused the corners of the bit yet either, so that could help. Now it seems to lock and unlock. Such a small lock though, it's hard to do it without blocking the view. So now that I've got the key done for the small English chest lock, I'm going to move on to making the key for the Crablock. And before I came out to the shop, I took some time to kind of measure it a little bit and come up with a drawing on the computer as to sort of what I'm planning on making. It gives me a good idea as to how it's going to look, the size of material, to allow me to figure out what sizes I need. It's going to be a close approximation of what the key is. Of course, once I start making the key, I need to actually fit it to the lock. So what I drew could change a little bit, but again, that's just sort of a starting point or a plan to go from. So we'll take a look at that process a little bit before we get started. So I like to draw on the computer because I'm much faster, and I like the editability, and I can get real precise and measure stuff accurately on the computer. So on the right, you're going to see the keyhole of the escutcheon, which the customer gave me a rubbing of, and on the left I'm drawing the end of the key. And then I also like to draw a profile of the whole key, and that gives me a good idea of the size of everything if I have the end and the profile view. So here I'm drawing in the warding, and I measured these off the lock. Again, when I make the key, I'm going to fit it to the lock rather than following my drawing specifically. But the drawing allows me to have a plan. So the collar at the top is going to be octagonal, and the bow here is going to look real similar to the keys I was making in my other Crablock build. The bow will be made out of one piece, looped around, so there'll be a seam in the middle. I'm not drawing the seam in, but it'll be there. So now that I've got my drawing all planned out, I can begin to actually start to make the key. And so what I'm going to start with first is the stem. So I've got a piece of 16 gauge sheet steel, and so I'm going to make the stem out of this. I went ahead off camera and I squared up this one edge so I can start to use that as a reference to measure over and figure out how much material I'm going to need. Now, based on my plan drawing, I estimate that I'm going to need roughly 1 5/64 of an inch material to wrap this eye from. Now, how you do that is you determine the size of the drill pin, which I measured off the original lock that it's going to be 30 seconds. So, knowing that my material is 1/16 of an inch thick, you add 1 thickness of the material to that 9 30 seconds. So that would be 11 30 seconds. Then you multiply that by pi, and I got 1 5/64 roughly. So I think it'll be close enough, so I'm going to start there. So I'm going to mark out that width on the sheet steel here. So I'll measure over that, and I'll get that cut, and I'll go from there. So the way that I'm going to mark this is I'm going to use a marking gauge, similar to how you would use one for wood. Right there. So we've got that line there. So now what I'm going to do is cut that off from here, and then I'll file up that edge to get that edge clean, and then I'll do the same with the length. And I'm actually going to try something a little different on this one than I normally do, or have done in the past I should say. So this will be a little bit of an experiment, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So now that I've got that roughly cut out, I cut just outside my line. So now I'm going to file to it. And the way that I like to do this is I put it lengthwise in the vise, and then I file with the length of it rather than going across it, because this way it ensures that the file is going to contact as much of the surface as possible. So it's kind of like a wood plane, right? You get those really long ones that go across the surface, and it helps to really level it out and even it out. It's going to kind of work the same way. So this is going to contact the majority of the surface this way, whereas if I go perpendicular to it, I'm really only hitting about 1 inch of that material, and it's a lot easier to get it nice and straight. So that's the way I tend to like to do it. And like anything when I'm filing, I tend to go pretty slow. I like to check a lot and see where my line is at. But you can start to see where you're filing and where you're not. So it's really easy to kind of tell if you've got more to go. So I'm hitting on the outsides a lot more. Sometimes it's a good idea to flip the piece around because sometimes you might be putting more pressure on the side near you or however you file. So that's what I've done here. So now I've got the width, I need to establish my length. I'm going to measure my drawing here and see what I've got on this. So I've got, well, my actual key is going to be basically 3 3/4. But I want to leave myself a little extra, and then I'm going to leave a little extra tab on the end. So that's going to be a little bit of what I'm doing differently, and again I'll explain that in a little bit. So I basically want 4 1/4. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to roll this. So I've got 2 swages here. This one says it's 1/2 inch, this one says it's 3/8. 3/8 I'm thinking is going to be better. I'm not sure how accurate these are, but that's what they're marked as. But I'm going to start with the wider one. So I've got this hammer. It's got kind of a round peen here that's pretty close to the size I'm going for the diameter on the inside of the stem. So I'll start hammering it, trying to bend it, roll it in. And I'll use this swage to kind of help form it in. I actually might start with a larger one than this, to be honest. And then I've got a piece of 9/32 round material that I can eventually start wrapping it around once I get it dished a lot more. So I'm going to go through that process here and see how far I can get on that. So you can see, as I was working, I ended up switching to larger swages. I didn't think about it when I was first setting up, but that allows me to slowly dish it in, and I went smaller and smaller until I got to this one. The 3/8 one was a little bit tight. It's probably because this wasn't like a perfect circle, so it was jamming itself in a few times. So this allowed me a little bit more room, the 1/2 inch one. It looks smaller than 1/2 inch, but that's what it says. But anyways, just continue working that around, working the seam. Now the seam is a little, let's say, it's not perfectly butted in. It ends a little bit, so there's a little bit of a V in it. But it's pretty tight, and again, a lot of that's going to be filled in with brass, and I'll file this up some. So I don't think that's going to be much of an issue. So hopefully you can see that. So you can see my seam here. And you want to try to work it pretty evenly to try to keep that as straight as you can. This one came out pretty good. So again, I just rolled that around that 9/32 material. And I've got this little tab on the end. So what I'm going to do with that, what I'm going to do differently, I'm going to forge braze the bit on the end here. And a lot of times you'll see people wrap stuff with like a really light wrapping wire. I've tried that before with the wire, and the issue that I always end up having with that is that it's a wrapping wire is soft and it's really small, and because it's not part of this, it heats up independently. And it always heats up way faster, and the issue that I have is once it gets hot, it's no longer tight, it loosens up, and then my bit falls away from where I actually want it to be held. And I've just never had good luck brazing stuff that way. I know some people do it that way. A lot of times what I'll do with something like this is I'll have it held in place with some sort of a fixture thing, and I'll braze it using a torch with a vise. But I want to forge braze this, and I always find it much easier to get a good braze in the forge if the pieces are mechanically held together. So what I'm going to do is have the bit longer than I need it to be. On the end of it, I'm going to have a tiny little tenon, and I'm going to rivet it to the stem here with that tab. And I'll cut all that off afterwards, and you'll never know that it was even there. But that'll allow me to hold it tightly to the stem as I'm brazing it. So now that I've got this rolled up, the next thing I want to do is I want to try inserting this into the lock and see if it does indeed fit on the drill pin, and if it's going to turn in the lock as well. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. So here I've got the lock. Here's my stem on the drill pin. It seems to go in. A little bit of play, that's okay, because I don't want it to be super tight, and that's not too wiggly whatsoever. And it spins freely, which is great. It's not hanging up on anything. So I think that's pretty good. And some of this play could be the fact that this drill pin actually is a little loose. So I think I'm going to end that video here. The next video I'll go into forging out the rest of the parts, fitting them all together, brazing it, and then fitting the key to the lock. If you enjoyed this video, please consider checking out some of my other videos. I'll link to those here. Also, please subscribe to my channels. That really helps me out. It keeps you up to date with the projects I'm working on, like this one. The shop build is going great, so please check out that build too. I'm behind in the videos as to where I'm at in reality. I'm maybe going to fast track some of those videos to catch up a little bit. But yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.